Okay, so good morning. Welcome to the presentation of Community Language Learning Approach. So the purpose of this presentation is to discuss about the origin of the community language learning approach, also to identify the stages of approach, design, and procedure, recognize the elements of a community language learning approach, and of course, like with these elements, you can also continue the design of the diagrams of in this case of community language learning approach. So let's start with general information. Discussing the community language learning approach, we need to identify who was the proponent. So in this case, the proponent was Professor Charles Curran, who was a specialist in counseling and a professor of psychology. So, since this beginning, you may wonder that community language learning is not in its origin a pedagogical approach. However, its roots derive from especially psychology. In this case, counseling. Counseling learning is the other name that this approach receives. Counseling, what is that? In this case, you need to remember that when you give counseling to someone else, is that you are going to provide advice, assistance, and support to another person who may present a problem or it has a necessity. So, in this case, that idea was taken for developing the community language learning approach. Sorry. So the idea of developing the community language learning approach draws on the counseling metaphor. And then what's the counseling metaphor? Well, you as a teacher, you are going to be the counselor, and learners or students are going to be the clients in the language classroom. It's this metaphor of the counselor and the client. So, in a community language learning approach, a learner presents a message in the mother tongue. This is something very crucial. The message it's going to be presented in the learner's mother tongue. So the message is translated into the target language by the knower. Who is the knower? The teacher. So when the teacher translates the message, the learner repeats the message in L2, and of course, that message is going to be addressed to another learner with whom he or she wishes to communicate. And that's how it is going to be formed like a chain, no? It's something like that, like, hey, teacher, ¿cómo puedo decir, me gusta comer mi crema de zanahoria? Ah, okay, listen. I like my carrot soup. Yes, repeat with me. I like my carrot soup. And then the teacher needs to enhance students to repeat so that the student feels confident, and then he is going to express, I like my carrot soup to a fellow student. Then, what's the theory of language? For community language learning, the foreign language learner tasks are to apprehend the sound system, assign fundamental meanings, and construct a basic grammar of the foreign language. So, for the community language learning approach, it's not going to be only exclusively attention to grammar aspects, but also how those grammar aspects sounds, and as well how with those grammar aspects you can transmit meaning. That's why this theory of language is also referred as language as a social process. And what is behind social process? Well, you as a teacher, as the knower, you will serve as an interlocutor, as someone who will provide assistance to the language learner, and at the same time, once that language learner has sufficient knowledge, linguistic knowledge, he or she feels confident with that knowledge, he will also, to some extent, help you as a teacher to also provide assistance with another less advantageous student. That's how this community starts to emerge. Then, what's the theory of learning, of language learning? Community language learning, or CLL, advocates a holistic approach to language learning. And what is that holistic approach? Well, learning is not only the matter of just being aware how much you can process, how much information you can process, but also it has a strong influence how you perceive the learning process. When I refer to how you perceive the learning process, it implies if you feel confident, calm, anxious, probably you don't feel like really secure of producing an expression. So this is the affective domain, how also the affective domain may affect positively or negatively the learning process. That's why CLL view of learning is contrasted with two other types of learning. The putative learning, what is only devoted for intellectual and factual processes, and behavioral learning. Learners are passive and their involvement limited. So, what is this contrast between putative learning and behavioral learning? With behavioral learning, remember, for instance, the audiolingual method. In the audiolingual method, students should be able to repeat until they master the sounds of the language. In contrast, when you approach the putative learning, as CLL does, you are going to see, okay, my student feels confident in how he or she is producing a sentence, for instance. So let's see what happens if I change a little bit the content, the grammar content. Do my student feel secure to try it or not? That is the characteristic of putative learning. In this case, you are going to consider also the affective domain within the learning process. So now, what's the theory of language teaching? In this case, the development of the learner's relationship with the teacher is central. And according to this theory of language teaching, the relationship between learners and teachers will follow 5 stages. And those stages are also compared with the human development, or as it says, ontogenetic development of a child. The first stage is known as the birth stage. And what's the characteristic of the birth stage? Feelings of security and belonging are established by the teacher, in this case with the student. The second stage, the learner's abilities improve, so they begin to achieve a measure of independence from the parent. In this case, it's quite similar to the adolescence. The third stage, learners speaks independently and may need just to assert their own identity. It's quite similar like the young adult stage. The speaks independently is like the learner is confident to produce their own sentences, like write down their own ideas, and the purpose of this stage is for students to try to experiment with language. Stage number 4, learner is secure enough to take criticism. What does that mean? Well, when you as the teacher starts providing feedback in both terms, quantitative and qualitative. So your feedback is going to guide your student in the fourth stage to improve the quality of their expression, the quality of what they are expressing. And in the final stage, fifth stage, the learners merely works upon improving style and knowledge. So in this stage, it's the moment when just the learner starts producing their own discourse, and it may need just the help of the teacher just for refining some aspects of sociolinguistics. For instance, the use of idioms, idiomatic expressions, the use of, I don't know, probably fixed expressions. So this relationship between the teacher and the learner is characterized by convalidation. But what is convalidation? In simple terms, convalidation implies how teacher provides feedback, the learner accepts that feedback, but at the same time, that feedback serves for the teacher to go further. In what sense? Well, the feedback that the teacher provides to the learner, and if the learner accepts that feedback, may provide the teacher with elements for subsequent language material. In this case, how the teacher can foresee probably providence of more complex terms, probably more refined vocabulary that is going to be needed for those learners. And then the process of convalidation will also allow the learner to see how independent can be from the assistance of his her teacher, and then to what extent the learner's ability may evolve so that now he can assist his fellow students for enhancing their own learning process, but at the same time helping his her colleagues in the language learning process. So let's see how this convalidation process or this relationship is established to meet SARS. And what is SARS psychological requirements? According to Charles Curran, S stands for security. Unless learners feel secure, they will find it difficult to enter into a successful learning experience. So that's why you need to create that sense of belonging to the learning community. That's why negative criticism are not allowed in that learning community. A stands for attention and aggression. But what does aggression mean? First, let's see attention. Attention should be taken as an indicator of the learner's lack of involvement in learning. Why? Well, basically because if students don't follow what the teacher is saying, explaining to them, definitely they are not going to get involved in the activities, in the learning activities. So that's why it's really necessary to maintain students' attention. Second, if students pay attention to your explanations, to the development of the activities, so they are going to display aggression. But in what sense aggression should be understood? Well, aggression applies to the way in which a child, having learned something, seeks an opportunity to show his her strength. That is aggression. In this case, they take the risk to participate in the role play, to participate in reading aloud something. That's exactly the idea of aggression. Students taking the risk to show off how able they are to produce language. Then the other, R. R stands for retention and reflection. So if the whole person is involved, the whole person remember knowledge, intellectual knowledge, and affective domain. That is the whole person. What is retained is internalized and becomes part of the learner's new persona. This implies, for instance, imagine that you are going to teach your kindergarten students colors and shapes. So probably at the beginning you are going to show them some colors and shapes like square, round, triangle, and the colors. If they enjoy those objects with colors and shapes, they are going to internalize that vocabulary, and then they are going to feel secure to participate, for instance, in an activity in which they need to match colors with shapes. And if they enjoy that activity, that knowledge will become part of them. And why they become part of them? Not only because they were cognitively able to process information, but also because they enjoy the activities. That's the combination of the affective domain and the cognitive one. And then reflection is a consciously identified period of silence within the framework of the lesson for students to assess his present stage of development and to re-evaluate future goals, according to Laforge. In practice, reflection is exactly the moment when you, as the teacher, okay, make a pause and tell me, how did you feel when participating? What did you notice about the language items you are learning? How confident do you feel when producing language? Those reflective questions are exactly the reflection moment. And finally, letter D. stands or denotes discrimination. When learners have retained a body of material, they are ready to sort it out and see how one thing relates to another. Cognitively talking, discrimination will be noticed when you introduce a new language topic, and then they may start questioning, well, teacher, it's quite similar to the previous topic we saw. Yes, it's quite similar, but now tell me, what's the difference? What can you see different? Well, today we are seeing another verb with ing, and the previous lesson we saw only verb to be. Yes, exactly. This is a good difference. But what else? Yes, now we are talking about activities that are developed at the moment of speaking in a continuous manner. Yes, well done. That's the moment of discrimination. And for sure, you need to give students opportunities to see this process of discrimination. So in this moment, I stop sharing so I can listen to you any comment about this theoretical part of the community language learning. Something that have called your attention, probably any doubt about a concept you have. So I listen to you. Either in Spanish or in English, something that have caught your attention or something that you consider quite difficult to understand?
Bueno, profe, yo lo que entendí es que es como un tipo de asesoramiento para, pues, para el estudiante, para ayudarlo a aprender.
Ni mejor dicho, efectivamente es una especie de asesoramiento en el sentido de que nosotros nos volvemos tipo como los consejeros, no los consejeros espirituales, los consejeros pedagógicos que van a servir tal cual como un mediador entre el material lingüístico y entre ese deseo genuino por aprender o no tan genuino y que nosotros como profes, como esos mediadores, lo podemos provocar, ese deseo por aprender sobre la lengua. Muy bien, Stephanie. No sé, Ana Karen o Evelyn.
Ah, Complementando lo que dijo Stephanie, pues además de como asesoramiento también es como que ayuda al estudiante a sentirse más seguro de sí mismo al querer hablar otra lengua, ¿no?
Precisamente ese es también el propósito de este enfoque. Y ahorita que veamos lo que ya van a ser luego los roles del profesor, los roles del estudiante, también se van a dar cuenta cómo algunas de las técnicas didácticas se pueden aplicar. Es decir, no podemos llevar de principio a fin todo un Community Language Learning Approach en la práctica porque también estamos sujetos, como ya saben, al tiempo, al sílabus, a que también, pues, no todos los estudiantes van a estar familiarizados con ese, llamémoslo así, nueva perspectiva de enseñanza, nueva perspectiva en el sentido, haciendo una comparación con cómo se ha acostumbrado la enseñanza de lenguas, generalmente, ¿no? El profe es el que determina todos los temas, el profe es el que va a evaluar todo, el profe es el que da toda la retroalimentación. Y sí puede causar un poco de, digámoslo así, extrañeza para un estudiante que viene de un sistema pues más rígido de enseñanza, a que se quiera implementar un sistema o adoptar un enfoque, digamos, con mayor flexibilidad. All right. Thank you so much. So now let's continue. We are going to start checking the objective of the CLL course aims to attain near native like mastery of the target language and how it's going to be achieved that near native like mastery. So, according to a CLL syllabus, it's most often used in the teaching of oral proficiency. So, it's not discarded the other skills. However, what is mostly emphasized is the use, or sorry, the practice of the speaking skill. The course progression is topic based, with learners nominating things they wish to talk about and messages they wish to communicate to other learners. When we talk about topic, it's not language topic. Probably students, the topic they wish to talk about are related to astronomy. Well, but you're a language teacher, you are not an astronaut or physics. So in this case, your task as teacher is try to shape the lesson about astronomy, probably about some stars, or probably how the universe was formed, or something like that. Something that contains factual information that students don't know and that they are interested in knowing. Specific grammar points, lexical patterns, and generalizations will sometimes be isolated by the teacher. So imagine that in this case, you consider you get some texts from the universe, and then you are going to start identifying some grammar patterns, vocabulary aspects. And that's the first part you need to consider when developing your syllabus for the CLL approach. What language content should I teach within the topic my students like to talk about? Then, the other part, learning and teaching activities. Of course, learning activities include translation, and remember, translation is a fundamental activity done by the professor, not by the students. Remember, there is no way of comparison between grammar translation method that the translation was done by students, and of course, remember, by sentences only with the literary purpose of understanding literary passages. So here with CLL, there is no point of comparison. Why? Because the immediate translation done by teacher is just with the purpose of communicating an idea. Group work recording. Here, recording is essential because students will have the opportunity to record their own voice. And of course, students may or should write, first of all, a tape script, the one that will be recorded. Also, it's important to establish a moment of reflection and observation of how well they are developing. And for sure, you can also establish free conversation moments. Then, listening activities require students to listen to a monologue, and usually the monologue is spoken by the teacher. And of course, that monologue contains lexicogrammar aspects previously reviewed. Reflection observation activities promotes that learners reflect and report on their experience of learning. That's a moment where students can express how they feel when reviewing a topic that may be interesting for them, or probably a language content that they consider quite difficult, but thanks to the design, they nowadays can say it's quite easy to understand. No? And then recording activities. They need to record their own conversations, probably free conversations or pre-established conversations, thanks to a tape script they developed. So here you can see the sample lesson of how the student is recording something, the teacher is just listening how well she's doing. The other students are trying to listen while the student is recording. Then, what's the teacher and student role? First of all, remember that the teacher's role is like a counselor who supports his student in their struggle to master the target language. Then, the teacher is responsible for providing a safe environment in which learners or clients can learn and grow. Then, initially, the learners are very dependent upon the teacher. So, all the time is, teacher, how do you say in English this, that? Learners then become members of a community. Their fellow learners and the teacher, they are part of that learning community. And they establish some interactions within the members of that learning community. Learners are also expected to listen attentively to the knower. In this case, the idea is that students, at the same time they are listening the knower, they can also ask for help to express an idea, and before just repeating, sorry, and before they just express that idea, the knower must make sure that the learners are doing on the right track. So that's why the knower asks students to repeat the idea. And of course, the final part of a lesson includes the report of deep inner feelings, how they well are doing, what are their doubts, what are also the frustrations learners are experiencing at the moment of probably repeating, pronouncing something. Then we are going to identify learner's role per stages. Did you remember that according to CLL, theory of language teaching, there are 5 stages. So those exactly these stages. The first stage, learner repeats utterances and overhears the interchanges between other learners and the knower. In the second stage, learners use simple expressions and phrases they have previously heard. In the third stage, learners begin to understand others directly. In this case, they feel more secure to start establishing some interchanges. In stage number 4, learners must learn how to elicit from the knower advanced level of linguistic knowledge. So in this stage number 4, the learners are going to ask for more elaborated ideas, more elaborated phrases. The final stage, learners refine their understanding of register. That's exactly the sociolinguistic aspect, register and the use of some fixed expressions, idioms, collocations. And then the students become counselors to less advanced students. This is the advantage of the CLL. Learners now become counselors. The same. Let's see teacher roles per stages. Then teacher roles. Teacher on the first stage provides target language translation. Second stage, teacher provides a model for imitation or request of the clients, the learners. Third stage, teacher monitors learners' utterances, providing assistance when required. Fourth stage, teacher may intervene directly just to correct deviant utterances, supply idioms, advise the use of fine points of grammar. And final stage, the knower derives a sense of self-worth throughout request for the knower's assistance. So the self-worth in this case is like only when it's really necessary that the teacher provides assistance, the teacher does that. Otherwise, he or she just becomes attentive to learners' oral production. Then, what's the role of the instructional material? Materials may be developed by the teacher as the course develops. It can also be used a textbook, but remember, according to CLL, students are the ones who ask for topics to be reviewed. So that's why the teacher probably does not follow an exact textbook. Nevertheless, teachers should develop summaries on the blackboard of some linguistic features of conversations generated by students. And then learners may work in groups to produce their own materials. What are their own materials? The scripts for the dialogues and the mini dramas. And here, this is like a hallmark material. The use of teaching machines, and the teaching machine is the human computer. What is understood as the human computer? Well, the teacher him herself. How? Imagine, teacher, I don't know how to say buenos días in English. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. No, listen. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Once again. Good morning. Good morning. No, no, no. Once again. Good morning. Good morning. Excellent. You, as the teacher, become like a machine, a computer that needs to repeat as many times as needed. You're going to become like a tape recorder or something like that, that the learner is going to ask for repetition as many times as he or she needs until learner becomes aware of the adequate pronunciation. So the human computer consists in students choosing some part of the transcript to practice pronunciation. Teacher follows the student's lead, repeats the phrase as often as the student wants to practice it. So now, what are some of the techniques? Small group tasks in which students are going to have intensive practice. Then their reflective listening. Students relax and listen to their own voices speaking in the target language on the tape so they can look for mispronunciation. There are some advantages of CLL. Endeavors to mitigate the intimidating affective factors present in EFL and ESL context. Of course, the counselor empowers learners to determine the type of conversation, and student-centered nature of CLL can bolster both extrinsic and intrinsic motivation aspects. But it also has some disadvantages. Counselors teacher non-directive approach may lead to ambiguity. Why? As I mentioned at the beginning, some students are not used to have that freedom of choosing the topic they want to talk. They most of the time follow a textbook, and that's okay, no? Only following a textbook, but now having that opportunity to freely select the topics, it may be shocking for some students. And obviously, the method heavily relies on inductive learning. So all the time you are going to provide the translation. So where's the moment in which students can deduce, for instance, grammar rules or deduce the meaning of unknown vocabulary? And translation poses a complex and challenging task. Why? Because sometimes if teacher doesn't know exactly at the moment the translation of an expression that is quite more complicated, it will be struggling in providing that data for the student. So I stop sharing and I would like to listen now from this part of teacher, learner's roles, role of instructional material, and techniques. If you have any comments, something that have called your attention. Also, you can tell me in Spanish if you wish.
Pues, profe, siento que se basa más en speaking and listening, en el cual pues el objetivo es hacer pues los que aprenden se sientan con más confianza, se les vaya eso de pues de que están todos tímidos y les da miedo. Y pues el maestro pues tiene como objetivo pues irlos guiando, o sea, como que no meterse del todo en las actividades que realicen, porque pues es también hacerlos como que más independientes, pero pues sí irlos guiando en eso de que dice de la pronunciación, pues bueno, que pronuncien bien, como que darles los temas o guía.
Sí, efectivamente, se enfatiza más en el desarrollo de la producción oral y sobre todo ese es otro de los, digámoslo, un poco de los dilemas que se tiene. A ver, yo como profe siempre debo tener la seguridad de los temas que voy a ver, mi plan de clase, mi programa. Pero ahora crear un programa desde lo que los estudiantes quieren hablar, desde los temas que ellos quieren hacer, ahí es en donde empieza también un poco ese dilema para el profe. ¿Qué tan seguro me puedo yo sentir como profe el poder empezar a dar o crear desde cero un programa? Y es también, pues, ok, uno de los desafíos que se tendría que enfrentar. Muy bien, Stephanie, muchas gracias. Ana Karen, Evelyn.
Eh, pues retomando como lo que dijo mi compañera, yo igual creo que es base y también es interesante el cómo la confianza para empezar a participar y a mejorar el idioma es como base porque si no, pues los estudiantes no se animan y eso es como un impedimento para que haya una mejora dentro del idioma o un desarrollo mejor que no practicándolo porque pues también parte importante de aprenderlo es hablarlo e intentar entenderlo, pero a veces por pena o por inseguridad no lo hacemos y eso impide una mejora dentro del idioma.
Y justamente para poder tener esa confianza es que también el profe necesita promover vamos a grabarnos nuestras voces, vamos a escucharnos. Y obviamente habrá algunos que al momento, pues sí, desconfían, les da pena o no, pero también puede poner el profe el ejemplo y a ver, escuchen, miren. Obviamente tratar también el profe no de hacer una pronunciación así muy perfecta o adecuada las primeras veces para empezar a crear como ese entendimiento, ese mismo nivel así de que, no, pues también el profe va haciendo poco a poco una evolución. Ay, yo también voy escuchándome que voy así poco a poco evolucionando. Y de esa manera poder hacer que el mismo estudiante reflexione sobre, ok, creo que aquí debo de pronunciar mejor, aquí creo que no lo dije muy bien. Pero creo que no lo dije bien porque no sé bien cómo decirlo. Entonces, oiga, profe, podemos practicar esta palabra y ahí es en donde se tiene la oportunidad, específicamente con este enfoque, para poder establecer esa conexión, como decía, el counselor with the client. Muy bien. Y finalmente, Evelyn.
Anteriormente y usted también se basa más en lo que es el listening y el speaking, pero por lo que estaba entendiendo también tienen como que esto de aplica tanto lo de teoría y práctica y lo de la confianza y que el maestro ahí está como soporte para el alumno de que si no pueden pronunciar algo, le está enseñando cómo puede mejorar en esto. Y creo que todo esto lo hace a base de la reflexión y la observación tanto del maestro hacia el alumno y como del alumno hacia el maestro.
Justamente esto que usted mencionó, lo último, es la base de la comunidad de aprendizaje. Observar, reflexionar, pero en ambos sentidos, del profe al alumno, como tradicionalmente se ha hecho, pero también del alumno al profe, ¿Por qué razón? Porque de esa manera también el profe va a tener los elementos necesarios para poder guiar de mejor manera al alumno e incluso también como parte del desarrollo profesional del profe, el que el alumno también le dé su punto de vista sobre algún aspecto que el profe puede incluso mejorar. Uno, para su propio desarrollo profesional como docente, pero también para que de mejor manera pueda asistir al estudiante. Muy bien, muchísimas gracias por estas reflexiones sobre el Community Language Learning.